session. We want to thank the Australia Pavilion for hosting this event, one that I think is an important part of our larger all of society approach to doing climate action that includes our various subnational actors, our national governments, subnational stakeholders of other kinds, and of course our research organizations, which we have to work with very closely to understand the opportunities for action and how to implement that ambition with the broader society. So my name is Nate Hultman. I am the director of the Center for Global Sustainability at the University of Maryland. I've also served in the Office of the Special Presidential Envoy for Climate in the previous US administration. But in both of those roles, my work has been to understand pathways for NDCs, for the global stocktake and other types of approaches that we're trying to implement under Paris, by which we work with our communities to better understand pathways to higher ambition, and in doing so, be more effective at implementing, which we know is one of the themes of the COP this year, very important one. So for this event, what we are doing, CGS, we are a US-based organization, clearly. We are about 100 people based at the University of Maryland, but also one of the things that we like to do, and I know our partners presenting today also like to do, is partner with other organizations around the world. And the theory there is we can learn from each other about how we can do not only our analytical work, but how we can do better engagement with our governments. That's at the national and even subnational levels. And you'll hear from several organizations today that do that type of work with their governments, whether it's Australia, Indonesia, the United States, and even others. So we are excited to be here today to present. Of course, you're noticing that I'm not from Australia, I'm from the United States. Of course, we are doing the best we can in our country. I'm happy to pick that up in conversation and Q&A later today, and we have done a lot of work on that question. But today we're going to be focusing on Australia, Indonesia, and the global outcome of those pathways. Our partners for this are Australia National University, and they've sent regrets. They were unable, because of various Belém-related reasons, were unable to join us today. But of course, they're a really critical partner in delivering this overall set of analyses you're going to see. And of course, I think it's not an overstatement to say their team has been an important part of the discussion in Australia as well about what the opportunities were, how to land that. And I will say, independent of ANU, from the CGS perspective, I just want to double down and say congratulations to Australia for being one of the high ambition countries putting a high ambition NDC down. It shows real leadership and real commitment to the Paris Agreement architecture to be able to scope that high ambition, make a commitment, and use that architecture of showing your goal and then working as hard as we can to achieve it, even though it's a stretch and it's hard. So I just want to kind of put that editorial comment in there as well. So we have a very good agenda. Let me just, for those of you, okay, let's just see the thing for what it is. Very hot in here. I get it. It's very hot. Thank you for being here. But just for those of you who are like wondering, should I stay the whole time? Yes, you should. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with an introductory presentation from, I'll kick it off, but then hand over to my colleague, Professor Jae-Hong Lo. We'll go then to a presentation from Kylie Turner from Climate Works Australia. And then we'll go to Delame Ramadhani from IESR Indonesia, one of Indonesia's premier research and modeling organizations. And we're really grateful that those organizations were able to join today. And of course, before we kick off, we are very happy to have here Ingrid Lundberg, who is part of the Australian government delegation and supporting the prep team for COP31. A branch head within the Department of Climate Change, Energy, Environment, and Water, where she's involved in the negotiations, including, of course, the prep for COP31. She's previously been Assistant Secretary in the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet. So we're very lucky and very grateful that you could join us today to give your brief kickoff perspective on the topic of the day. And with that, I'm going to hand over Ingrid over to you.
Firstly, thanks so much, Nate. Ooh, one moment. I've got too many bits and bobs with me today, so sorry. Thank you, Nate, and it's a pleasure to make some opening remarks before we get into what is actually going to be a very exciting and sort of thought-provoking conversation, I think, about the analysis work that's been happening. So I'm very excited to be introducing this panel. I wanted to start by talking a little bit about Australia's NDC, because I think our NDC, as you said, is an ambitious NDC. A huge amount of, analytical and research work goes into forming that NDC, and we can get into that, and you'll find out more about how that process works. But we're very proud in Australia to have announced in September of this year our 2035 NDC. That NDC sets a 62 to 70% reduction of emissions on 2005 levels by 2035. And I think what's exciting about our NDC is that it's also a blue NDC, so we've actively linked our work into oceans. We have captured at the back of our NDC framework all of the global stocktake objectives and mapped how our NDC is delivering against those. But I think we've also, what's really important, is linked it directly to Australia's domestic policy settings. So we have a net zero plan, we have 6 sector plans for all of our high emission sectors that underpin that. And the collective underpinning work really shows not just that we've got a big and ambitious goal and that we're going to work really hard to get there, but that we've done all of the thinking and analytical work behind the scenes to map out each of the sectors and how they're going to get us there. So you can't do that rigorous work without academic institutions and analysis organisations like the ones we're going to hear from today, who are doing rigorous research and analysis and helping us to put together the work that we're trying to achieve. So I'd like to just kind of acknowledge the work of the Centre for Global Sustainability, Indonesia's Institute for Essential Services Reform, and Australia's Climate Works Centre and Climate Change Authority, because they're the ones that do the work, and we then as government use and build on that work. And it's through partnerships across the world that we're also helping to lift ambition, understand the impacts that we're having, and have a better sense of what the collective overall impacts are looking like and how much more we might need to do. So without any further remarks, I'd like to hand over to Nate and the team and Kylie to kick off the session. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Ingrid, for the remarks. Thank you also for your leadership and Australia's leadership in the space, in this community of nations. With your demonstration of high ambition, and from our perspective as analytical organizations that work in this, again, we can affirm the high level of ambition. And it's also been great to see the detail with which Australia has spelled out not only what's underpinning their NDC, but also how they're thinking about the global stocktake and other sort of types of ways to think about our global community into the future, how we use this wonderful process we've set up, wonderful but yes, imperfect, to kind of continue to drive action forward, not only in the country level, but also internationally as well. So we're really deeply appreciative of that, as well as Australia's presence, continued leadership in this space. Okay, let's now turn to the first of our 3 presentations. And I want to kind of note that this is work that that we have done at CGS, and some of the work we will present has also been done in joint partnership with the team at Australia National University as well. So we give them full credit for helping us understand what Australia's situation is, as well as then working together over many years now to better understand these pathways. So with that, I will go ahead and start, and I'm going to just sort of introduce our overall CGS approach, and then I'm going to hand over to my colleague, Professor Jae-Hong Lo, who's our Assistant Director at CGS, to present some of the analysis that we've done. So if we can advance, I have a clicker. Oh, there is. This is what it's all about. People, it's just real-time solution. We have to just go with what we got and just move it forward. Okay, so the first thing I want to kind of show, I recognize it's a bit of a busy slide. Maybe next time I'll revise it a bit. But for now, what I want to show is that what we're trying to do at the Center for Global Sustainability, again, as I noted in my opening comment, is to kind of work, set up a network of partnerships around the world. There's lots of great organizations in lots of different countries that are doing this kind of work, and we love to make those connections, learn from each other, share what we do analytically, learn from what other people are doing analytically. And what we're trying to do is to also then make that information as best we can available, as we know that the process of Paris depends on others, all of us, getting a good understanding of what makes a good target. It's a really, I worked on this in government over many years, starting with Obama White House actually, and then through several US NDC cycles. Those of you who have been involved in this space, even in the recent cycle, know that NDC analysis and how do we get to our long-term strategies, can be a very technical feeling topic, and it's very hard for many people to understand what is a good target for Australia, what is a good target for Indonesia, what is a good target for others. The problem is that there's no one answer to any of those things, right? So we have to recognize that there's many different perspectives on that, and embrace the fact that there are different perspectives. One thing we're trying to do is to show through our analysis, our modeling, and our work with other partners around the world, some transparent pathways that we can then document that other people can look at and say, okay, we agree with that, or we don't agree with that. It's actually fine to disagree, right? It's okay to kind of not have the same perspective on this. But what we're trying to do is create a set of pathways that show what can we look at as a good pathway for country X, country Y, and country Z that is not done in a kind of top-down, one-size-fits-all way, but is trying to actually recognize the fact that, as we know from this process, there are differentiated situations in every country. And so in the current country situation in Australia or the United States or Indonesia or other places, how do we understand the scope for action there? How do we understand the role of subnational actors there? How do we understand the opportunities for new policies and new technologies there, given the specific situation in that country? Because I've been on the government side, some of you are on the government side, I've been on the research side and civil society side, so I know what it's like to be asking for more ambition. And one of the things we need to do is recognize that while every country is different, there are certain ways that we can understand what high ambition looks like in those different situations. So what we're doing is we've actually released a new resource in the last couple of months, which you see the link there, which is showing high ambition pathways for different country situations that have been developed with partners around the world. And so that's just the larger context, partly why I, from the United States, am actually here on the Australia Pavilion, is that we work with ANU, we've actually worked with some of the other Australia teams, love to work with ClimateWorks Australia in the future, about how to understand this work and how we can all do better as a result of it. All right, I should keep it short. This is a sort of technical slide, and I'll keep it short because Jae Hong needs to go. But I want to kind of note that one of the other things we're able to do when we as a global community of analysts kind of get together and set up these pathways is also help our governments understand how those NDCs can aggregate into a pathway that keeps our Paris goals within reach. And I'm going to say today, I know there's a lot of discussion. We are going to overshoot 1.5. I know that, I get that. But that doesn't mean we default back to 2. I think that what we can show is that there are pathways that if countries embrace these pathways, these high ambition national pathways, we can keep a pathway open to keep, a possibility of getting back to 1.5 by end of century and minimizing the duration and extent of overshoot maybe to 1.7, 1.8. And we have to be very truthful about that, but also recognize that our actions can actually do that. We can actually deliver. So another part of our analysis is the aggregation of those things, and we're always happy to talk separately. I won't spend more time today about it because we want to get to the national pathways. So with that, I think I'm going to invite my colleague Jae Hong up to present the work that we've done with ANU and with our teams on Australia and Indonesia. So Jae, why don't you just come up and we'll just transition smoothly into her presentation, and then we'll go to the other ones.
Yeah, thank you, Nate, for this opening. So let me first introduce our global ambitions pathway that Nate mentioned. We actually doing a bottom-up approach to aggregate those country ambitions pathway. What our finding is that we find that there's like a 39% to 43% emission reduction actually can achieved in total emission, GHG emission. Well, if we, put these high ambition pathway trajectories toward this net zero 2050 or 2060, combined with those targeted non-CO2 abatement, which actually will deliver a 1.7 degree, then a return to 1.5 C degree technical possible. That's right. So that's the main finding. But also another layer of our finding is like, okay, there's a potential subnational or subsectoral contributions that we can find through each country's content. For example, in the electricity sector, we find there's more solar and wind actually deployment because of the global scale up of wind and solar, right? So our finding is like a 10-fold increase from now on to 2035 will give us a very ambitious global pathway, and also giving different countries like authorities, we can find some country will probably have more authority from the land use sector, waste sector, and transportation sector for the subnational engagement. Okay, so now let me talk about our high pathway for Australia. So actually what we found actually is like our ambitions, high ambitions pathway can deliver 69 to 73% emission reduction by 2035 from the 2005 level, cover all the GHG emission for Australia. And also we can see, actually, giving our knowledge of Australia as like a second NDC from 62% to 72%, we understand actually, the high end of this Australia's commitment actually very closely aligned with our scenario. And also we can say the key factors, actually key contribution is the power sector. I'm going to go a deeper dive of the power sector broke down. So we can see actual coal, this is a dark color presented right now. There's two messages I want to say. First, we need to phase out coal rapidly because actually right now coal actually delivers 45% of the electricity generation in Australia, while our high ambitions pathway shows in 2035 coal will reduce way below to 5% by 2035, while there's a rapid renewable technology deployed, especially for solar and the wind. You can see the yellow and the blue bar, which means now it's 30% electricity generation from the wind and the solar in Australia. And our analysis shows will be 85% by 2035. So this is like a lot of like solar and the wind, especially Australia's offshore wind will happen on the ground. That's the main finding. So now let me find, this is another joint actually model analysis that CGS did with the ANU, the Australian National University, through a new released model we call the GCAM Australia, because generally GCAM a global model with Australia and New Zealand actually within a region. So we are able to break Australia as a single region to have a better representation of Australia. And then we have 4 additional scenarios. I'm going to skip all the technical detail. So what we found actually for the higher ambitions, which is a green line, in 2030, that green line can deliver 64% emission reduction for Australia, which is at the lower bound of the Australian's 2030 commitment. However, if we look at the net zero higher ambitions, that actually will close the gap for Australia's 2035 commitment. However, which means we need more coal phasing out from the renewable, including the solar and the offshore wind, to replace the gas, and also deeper decarbonization in the industry and the resources sectors. So that's what we found. If we look at this figure is electricity generation, again, similar messages. Coal need to phase out dramatically by 95% actually in our higher ambition scenario, which means by 2035, coal will be phased out dramatically, and also by 2040, in this analysis, coal will be fully retired. And meanwhile, renewable will be heavily deployed by all these higher scenarios. So renewable will be more in Australia, including the solar and wind. That's the current finding, especially if you look at the by 2050, renewable will be comprised the entire electricity mix. So that's the current analysis. If you are really interested in know more about this analysis, we'll have a policy brief that jointly released by the CGS and also by the ANU, and please stay tuned with us. Okay, now I'm going to talk about a little bit about our analysis for Indonesia. So for Indonesia, actually, we specifically designed 2 scenarios to reflect the president's priority of sustained strong economy growth of 8% within his first term between 2025 to 2029. So we have a high GDP scenario, which actually over there is the orange line, and also a low GDP scenario to reflect, the 2 scenarios. But both of the scenarios are high ambitions. Differentiation is the GDP growth rate. But with these 2 joint scenarios, we found that actually can deliver 46 to 49% energy reductions in Indonesia. And also, if we are able to see by this is like a panel B, and the panel C is emission without the land use sector and with the land use sector, because we understand Indonesia actually play a very important, land use sector in Indonesia play a very important role to achieve either their 2030 net sink or 2025 net sink in the new NDCs, right? So our result actually yields without land use sector, and emission will peak by 2025 in Indonesia. Well, if we look at the land use sector per se, actually, it will achieve net sink by before 2035. So this is a high ambitions analysis result. Of course, there are also a lot of methane abatement will happen in Indonesia in the short run, which is about 33% reduction in methane emission in Indonesia. Finally, I also want to present a comparison between the newly released NDC in Indonesia between our high ambitions analysis. Because we know Indonesia made a commitment of peak by 2030 and also with absolute emission range by 2035. So on the table, I'm showing you the first 2 columns actually are the 2 scenarios provided in their current second NDC, with a low and a high, means also low energy growth and high energy growth assumption. And also the last column is our analysis. So take a look at that. One key takeaway I want to mention is the main diverse actually happen on the difference in the allocation of the emission across sectors. Because on the last column, we see all green color, means our analysis shows a more greater or more balanced allocation of energy reduction across sectors, because they're all showing green color. Well, on the first 2 columns, we see actually the NDC have a disproportionate burden actually on the land use sector, while allow other sectors still grow their emission, including the energy and the waste sector. So if we look at the land sector per se, actually in the NDC, land had to drop 193% reduction in Indonesia, while our analysis shows 106% emission reduction from the land use sector. Yeah, so that's the main takeaway. Finally, I just want to give you a summarization of the subnational contributions to enhance country ambitions by summarizing the 2 countries. We already know countries are different. That's why we have to take cautious when we talk about subnational contribution, sectoral contribution. Obviously, Australia, we see more potential from the power sector, transportation sector, while in Indonesia, we see more from the power, waste, and the land use sector. But the framework we actually present here is not only we are able to model those quantitative target into a model, but there's more cautious we have to take in at the sectoral consideration, because some of the element we have to work with the local collaborators using policy engagement to achieve accelerated ambitions. Okay, thank you. So I'll maybe hand back to Nate.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thanks everybody for your attention on that. It's now my pleasure to hand the floor over to Kylie, and let me give you a quick introduction here. So Kylie Turner leads the Sustainable Economy System at ClimateWorks Center, and pursuing sustainable pathways toward net zero by focusing on how we can accelerate systems in line with limiting global temperature to 1.5. And with that, I'd like us to just welcome Kylie up to the floor, and you can share your comments with us as well. Thank you.
Thank you, and thanks everyone. Really great to see this analysis gone through. I am Kylie Turner, I'm from ClimateWorks Centre. At ClimateWorks Centre, we like to say we bridge the gap between research and action. But if you ask my kids, I help scientists talk to normal people, so hopefully that's what I can do for you today. We've seen a lot of numbers, and a lot of us, as we've been developing Australia's NDC, have been in the numbers game. So at ClimateWorks, we did our decarb scenarios work in 2023, and we thought that the least cost emissions reduction pathway across the economy was between 75 and 85% reduction in 2035, which is in the ballpark of where we've gotten to and what you can kind of see here. The other important piece of work that we've done is we work with states and territories, which you can see from the work that the team's done have quite an outsized impact on climate policy in Australia. And we put together what we call a national equivalent target. So if you add up all of the state and territory targets and what they are hoping to get to, remembering that they're not all the same, so we have to do a little bit of smoothing that out, we actually get to a 61 to 70%. And so what we've been saying is that 70% should absolutely be the floor, and then that's happily where we got to with the NDC. I think the most important part of Australia's NDC, though, and it kind of goes to the implementation focus of this COP and the what's next when we're trying to deliver on our promises to the world in terms of decarbonisation, is actually working out how you do that sector by sector. In Australia, we've got a really good basis for doing that with the sector pathways and with sector plans. And whilst we always think that we can do better and would say yes and at ClimateWorks, we think that the sector plans are a really good starting point, as traumatic as they might have been to kind of bring them to life, but they are alive now. And we are starting to think about what we can do to make them investable and make them a really clear direction of travel going forward. And we look forward to talking about that, I'm sure, at many more COPs and in many more rooms just like this one. But that's kind of it from me, and I will enjoy the panel later.
Great, thank you, Kylie, and very much exciting the work you're doing on the sectoral pathways and sort of identifying those opportunities for other types of non-national government entities to engage and understand what the possibilities are. I'm sure we could learn a lot from that, and I would look forward to following up after this as well on that. So our third speaker is Delamir Ramadani, who's a climate policy coordinator at the Institute for Essential Services Reform in Indonesia. We at CGS are grateful that we've been able to collaborate with IESR over many years on a number of different analytical inquiries relating to Indonesia's energy sector and larger kind of national strategies work. So with that, let's welcome Delamir Ramadani up to share your thoughts about Indonesia, and then we'll have some time for Q&A at the end. Okay, thank you.
Okay, hi everyone. So I would like to add some layers on the status quo of our NDC that just submitted last month. This is the summary of the NDC progress from the first one, and then to enhance NDC, and then becomes the second NDC. We could see that the target are numerically improved, and in the perspective of format, it's also improved to not comparing it to the BAU, and now the new NDC, or we call it a second NDC, also provide additional scenario of two conditional scenario that already mentioned in the previous um, presentations, which now we consider as conditional scenario. And this is so much a betterment compared to the previous NDC. But of course, there are a lot of layers that we could see again, whether or not Indonesia can actually improve, or whether or not this is actually 1.5 compatible. And other layers of it also, I would like to say, it adds sectoral coverage, um, additional sectoral coverage like marine sector, and also cover new GHG gas in industry sector, which is hydrofluorocarbons, and then it also informed the peak emissions for the SNDC and the change of the metric global warming potentials. So this is the scenario and the takeaways that we see. So the first things is about the unconditional target. We could see that the target projects peak emissions in 2050, which is very late, and the conditional target will reach peak emissions averagely in 2030, except the energy sector, which to peak in 2035 or 2038. And this is actually concerning that there will be limited action before 2030 and a huge reliance on steep reductions after 2035 to meet the net zero target. This scenario, the LCCP high or the conditional scenario, integrates 8% of GDP growth that the government is aiming. So this already paired very well with the national agenda, with the national development plans, with energy development plans, and other sectoral development plans. This is a good news that it means they're likely to be faithful with the implementations, that the projected emission probably will be close if they implement it well. And there's already projects on the ground, more or less, to implement this target. And the government of Indonesia, through its NDC, also claimed that the conditional target, or the LCCP-L and the LCCP-H, is 1.5 compatible or Paris compatible. This is also giving a sign to us as a researcher in Indonesia that we have completely different perspective on the carbon budget, that Indonesia has to be considered 1.5 compatible. We advocate for the government to open their data and also explain the assumptions, how much is our carbon budget and how much is it assigned to every ministry or sectoral. And the next one, I would like to zoom in to the sectoral level. We could see that from the graph also, that energy sector emission will grow higher in the 8% economic growth scenario, or the very right graph, which is, like I mentioned earlier, is aligned with government of Indonesia's visions, which with this scenario, energy sector emission is aiming for 25% renewable energy mix by 2030, and this is I echo the University of Maryland's findings that this is actually going not in a good directions, where the renewable energy mixes are very low, and to be 1.5 compatible, or to reach 1.5 to reach net zero target that are more balanced, they need to boost the energy renewable energy target even higher. The government of Indonesia already stated some political statement, or show some political courage to actually add more renewable in the system, but unfortunately through the second NDC it's not well translated yet. Also in the national energy plan it's not well translated yet. So this is also a homework that the civil society and also academia and international community should push the government, Indonesian government, to actually translate those targets into a specific law, policy, or development plans. And then the second one, I would like to also highlight the land use and land use change in forestry. Um, Indonesia remains highly dependent to the LULUCF sink, and this is an old pattern where Indonesia put these sector as a backbone, masking masking emission reduction from the sinks, which is not very good measures, we say, and the and especially this year, the government of Indonesia communicated that they will add marine sector as part of their mitigation strategy, and putting highlight on industrial sector, it seems like Indonesia will try to stabilize the emission in industry, also in agriculture sector until 2035, and then drop down the emissions to reach net zero target. Waste sector also has a lot of progress this year, where the government put a new target to reach zero waste target in 2045, and put some policy also to help the implementation on the ground. So to look deeper on whether or not this scenario are 1.5 compatible, we compare NDC Indonesia's 3.0's NDC target with what Climate Action Tracker deemed as 1.5 compatible. This is the graph that explains how is it the historical emissions, the projected emissions based on the current policy on the blue lines, and then also two scenarios of 1.5 compatibility. The fair share one is to be compared with the unconditional target, and then the colored lines or the model domestic pathway is a compatibility of 1.5 degrees Celsius with assumptions of least cost pathway where Indonesia would get international support. We could see here that the emissions from the LULUCF or forest and land use change are very fluctuative. The government actually updated the data, revised their historical data of this sector, especially to capture. They said it captured better sinking, which is deeper, and so that if we only see the absolute level of emissions, we would see that it masks a lot of emission reductions in other sector. And if we could focus on the blue lines here, where the current policy projections will be in 2030 or 2035, if the policy is well implemented, we could already see that it's aligned very well, or with the NDCs, both conditional and unconditional targets. So these two targets are within the reach of the current policy. This would be good idea, like I mentioned earlier, that it means it well aligned with the sectoral policy, but it means that Indonesia also not capturing an emission target that are in the most ambitious perspective. The government claimed that they don't want to overpromise of the commitment or climate commitment, because they want to sure that they want to be sure that in the ground it is implemented. It is we have funds for that, but in fact it's not 1.5 compatible, and it means that Indonesia needs a lot of support, both technically and also financially, to actually drop down the emissions. And this is also, in conclusion, shows that Indonesia will easily overachieve both NDC, and even without the significantly more ambitious policy and target, they would already achieve it. So this is just keeping the business as usual, we would say, and it's very unfortunate. And then next, I would like to take everyone to see where actually or how big the gap is to 1.5 compatible pathway based on the CAT analysis. Um, the NDC projection is not updated yet here. We still calculate based on the draft, and it's already updated. It's slightly below or slightly above, but the lending or the emissions where the emission needs to fall would be around 860 metric ton CO2 equivalent, excluding the LULUCF by 2030, and also drop to 720 by 2035. We could see the gap is very high, that Indonesia needs a very, very much needed technical and financial support to actually drop down the emissions. And then this is for the conditional, and the next is for, oh, it doesn't work, is it? Can you, sorry, it doesn't work. Yeah. And the next is for the unconditional target. They actually not very far away compared to the conditional one, which the emission must land on around 900 to 800 metric ton CO2 equivalent, excluding LULUCF by respectively 2030 and 2035. And this is already a polar opposite directions, of course, and we encourage the government of Indonesia for to at least stabilize the emissions from 2019 to keep the emission level not too far to what it is needed to be 1.5 compatible. In general, it is not a good picture that we take for the new target of Indonesia, also the climate policy, and we actually expect more, seeing how the president of Indonesia saying so many promises to add 100 gigawatt solar, for example, to electrify many villages, and also to phase out coal, which is not embedded or not anchored in the current NDC or any national policy. And we couldn't say specific target like the University of Maryland saying like how many emissions should be dropped down to be balanced, but we could say it here in general what Indonesia can do to align with NDC, to align with Paris Agreement goal, which is the first one, is to put, of course, more ambitious conditional and unconditional target. From the previous COP, where the GST are out, every country needs to update their or revisit their 2030 target, and unfortunately Indonesia doesn't formalize their updated 2030, even though the SNDC put or outlines 2030 target, but it's not formalized, so it still follows the old pathway, even though they are internally or saying or communicating in the national dialogue that they will aiming for lower emission level compared to the previous NDC. So it's unfortunate, but the new NDC, like I already mentioned earlier, it's already portraying higher ambitions, numerically improved, and with some other improvements like inclusion of just transitions, inclusions of waste sector target, and the ministry seems very serious as well for the first time to address waste sector emission reductions, which is a big problem in Indonesia, which also tightly related with emissions from methane, which also a big problem. It gives a good signal, but we are advocating for more ambitious conditional, unconditional target, incorporating the factor of fairness and equity. And then the second one is also to commit to a binding Paris compatible coal phase out target. The national government or the president already put these coal phase out target in their vision and missions, in the 5-year mission and vision and mission, but unfortunately it's not there in the climate policy or climate planning documents. And then the third one is to, of course, to set ambitious renewable energy target along with strengthening its enabling environment for rapid deployment. We advocate for Indonesia to revise its fossil subsidy policies, and also to enshrine their previous commitment to boost up the renewable energy share. ISR estimated that Indonesia needs to commit to at least 50 or to 55% of renewable energy mix by 2030 to be able to catch up with 1.5 aligned target. And then the fourth one, to of course ensure implementations of global methane pledge of cutting at least 30% emissions from 2020. Indonesia has committed to these in the previous COP, but unfortunately it's not implemented yet. There's no policy yet or specific institutions assigned to actually implement this pledge. And the last one is also to strengthen forest protections and governance to promote sustainable land use and management. Indonesia's government has a very great visions of energy sufficiency, but the target itself is very good. Everyone should have access to energy, clean energy especially. But the things is, but the questions is, how is it gonna be happen? If it's gonna cost more forest to be degraded, then it's probably not a good idea. And especially now in Indonesia, they have a big plan of converting degraded land or even forest to food estate or to energy forest, which means strengthening forest protections or forestry sector has to be improved, and this is what we are advocating. And lastly, it's also important for us to highlight that as a developing nations, Indonesia needs massive international support to be able to actually put higher ambitions, and especially climate finance that are supposed to be well designed and easy to deploy. It's probably being a dialogue everywhere about JETP and how it's a great step that Indonesia could tap on that. But there are a lot of layers in it on how the funding deployment and then development of the business plan is also a struggle. And I think this has to be addressed, and this problem has to be addressed, and more support are needed to be channeled to Indonesia. And that's all for me. I hope it gives some insights from everyone. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you so much for that wonderful and deep presentation. And it's clear you all have put a lot of analysis and also thought and engagement in Indonesia to kind of figuring out where those pathways might lie. So I think the theme that I'm going to pull out of that last presentation is, here we are at COP30, we are where we are. And I appreciate that there's a lot of high ambition countries and a lot of high ambition action. I kind of lift up Australia here as one of those examples of that. I'm from the United States. We're needing to work hard to enhance our action, primarily in this phase through the subnational leadership that we do have. And I want to, there is a good story there, but it's in the context of a larger set of challenges in our country. And so we are where we are today, and I think Indonesia, you've identified a few areas where improvements could be made, or perhaps overachieving on the goals that have been put forward by the government may be the best near-term strategy. But I think as we are all at COP30, it's very clear we're going to have a conversation about thinking about what countries can do to both revisit what they've already put forward in certain circumstances, particularly those who haven't put the highest ambition targets forward, and then also thinking about how we work together as we move ahead to try to close that gap. I regret to say I don't think we're going to have time for Q&A, but what I think we can propose, the the Australian Pavilion is going to need to move on with its next set of events, and so we'll conclude this event. And I want to thank everybody, the presenters, Australian government for hosting us and supporting the work. And then maybe we can offer to, if any of the speakers can hang out in the back, we can maybe just do Q&A informally rather than formally, and I think we'd welcome that. But please, let's thank our speakers for today, and thanks everybody for joining.